How's it going, everyone? So we have seen some interesting developments with two of the most reliable computer models, one of them being the European model, where the European model by Thanksgiving weekend wants to take a major winter storm to the Midwest as well as the Northeast. So if we were to continue to move forward with the forecast, let's zoom fast forward all the way to the Thanksgiving weekend time frame. This is Wednesday, November 27th. We do have a low pressure system coming off the Pacific Northwest coast, and there is quite a bit of cold air behind it. And as you probably already know, when we see a large area of cold air behind a low pressure system entering an area like the Gulf Coast states where it's very warm, humid, along with a ridge that's located here that's bringing a strong southerly flow, that creates a very unstable environment and pretty much a recipe for a snowstorm to develop. And this is exactly what we see by the time we approach Thursday, November 28th. We see heavy snowfall over Nebraska, Iowa, and moving even more forward into the more long-term future, we do see that snow eventually moves into much of the southern Great Lakes region as this impacts Cleveland, Chicago, Detroit gets involved with some heavy snowfall, and this storm is quite powerful as well. Its millibar pressure will hover around the 990s, but will rapidly intensify by the time it approaches the Atlantic Ocean, where of course it could tap into that very warm and moist air mass that's right over the Gulf Stream of the Atlantic, which is the primary catalyst, I should say, when it comes to nor'easters strengthening as rapidly as they do. And as you can see, by the time we approach Black Friday, November 29th, we see just a very impactful snowstorm for the Northeast. And it's not only impacting the interior Northeast either. This is bringing heavy snowfall to New York City, southern New England. So cities like Boston and Hartford could get involved with heavy snowfall and gusty winds as well, because look at the millibar pressure at 990 millibars. This is very conducive for strong winds to occur. Now, of course, the big question you are probably asking is, what's the chance that this is going to occur? So, of course, the forecast hour is still very far out. This is going beyond the 200-hour mark, so there's still a lot of uncertainty with this storm system as we approach next week. But I'll say that the certainty is getting a little bit higher, mainly because the GFS model is also agreeing with a very similar scenario to what the European model is currently stating. Because if we were to take a look at the GFS model, the computer model wants to develop this storm system in a very similar fashion to what the European model is forecasting. It expects an Alberta Clipper to eventually move into the Great Lakes and Northeast region, which should set the stage for the temperatures to be cold enough throughout the Midwest as well as the Northeast for the possibility of a snowstorm to exist. As we approach the Thanksgiving weekend. And continuing to move forward with the forecast, we see that another key thing that's definitely different from the previous runs we've been seeing with the computer models is that the ridging is weak enough to allow the cold air as well as the northwesterly flow to move further southward, which enhances the possibility that a lot of the more populated areas of the U.S., including the southern Midwest as well as the coastal Northeast, would get more involved with snowfall. So this is a 12Z run. Actually, this is let me show you guys the latest run. So the latest run, as you can clearly see, develops a storm system in a very similar fashion. It does expect a low pressure system to come off the Pacific Northwest coast, and then we see just very heavy snowfall impacting southern New England as well as mid-Atlantic states where New Jersey, New York City, Pennsylvania, and of course many of the Midwest states like Ohio and Indiana get involved with very heavy snowfall. So, and look at the forecast hour at this point. So this is around 7 days out. So approximately a week out. So while it is certainly uncertain at this point, it isn't so out of the realm of possibilities. It's not like I'm showing you guys a forecast hour that's over 10 days out. At that point, that's just a guess from the computer models. With the two most reliable computer models, the GFS and the European model, at least having somewhat of a similarity when it comes to the trajectory of this storm system, as well as the swath of how large this snow is. it's giving me a little bit more of an indication that there could be some truth to the forecast, and it's making me believe that at least some sort of major winter storm will develop right by the time we approach Thanksgiving weekend, either in the Midwest or the Northeast. But the key thing, of course, which is a question with many snowstorms moving towards the eastern half of the United States, that's beyond, I'll say, 5 days out, is where exactly the heaviest snow will fall, because there's still a lot of uncertainty when it comes to that when we're talking about forecasts that's beyond the 5-day mark, and it really all depends on the amount of ridging. If the ridging is a little bit stronger, then we're more likely to see the snowfall move northward and mainly impact the northern Midwest, and it'll more likely be a rain event for many of the more populated areas of not only the Midwest but the Northeast. So let me show you guys a height anomaly to give you guys a better indication of what I'm talking about, since this better represents how the air pressures, where exactly the highest and the lowest air pressures are. So here's a look at the 500 millibar height anomaly. So the key difference with this run and the European model's latest run compared to their prior runs is that this ridge that was expected to be stronger by the time we approach early next week over the eastern half of the United States is now much weaker in this run. So it allows this Alberta Clipper to easily move southward into the Midwest and Northeast without being deterred to move further northward, which of course brings the cold air further southward and sets a stage for a recipe for a snowstorm to develop with that much cold air parked over the eastern United States. So we see that occur. There's a cold air, there's a Clipper system moving into the Northeast, and of course that sort of brings the jet stream further southward than it would be if the ridge was a little stronger. And not only that, with this trough being able to move further southward, it also weakens this ridge that's a little bit to the east of this storm system, since the lower air pressure associated with this Clipper system is weakening the air pressures over the southeast. So that again sets a stage for this storm system to move well further southward than it would have if, let's say, this Alberta Clipper system moved a lot further northward, allowing this ridge to have more of an area to build strong. So as of right now, it seems a little bit more likely that this storm system will move a little bit further southward than expected. Not completely guaranteed, but thanks to the agreement we're seeing from the computer models with this Alberta Clipper system moving further southward than anticipated, I think it's a little bit more likely we're going to see the storm system move southward, which of course puts more of the populated areas of the United States at a higher risk of a major snowstorm to develop. And as you can see, the ridge is very weak. The storm system has plenty of cold air behind it, and there's a decent amount of warm air that's right around this ridge, because although the ridge is weak, there's still a southerly flow associated with it. There's still a decent amount of warm, humid air associated with it, especially on the eastern side. So that enhances the instability for this snowstorm to intensify. There's enough cold air and enough of weakness in ridging for the northwesterly flow to move further southward, and that's pretty much just creates a recipe for a significant snowstorm to develop for the Midwest and Northeast. Now, of course, the key will be this ridge, because although it's becoming a little bit more likely this Alberta Clipper will move further southward, there still, of course, could be that possibility that maybe this Alberta Clipper might not be as strong as anticipated, which means that the ridging would be able to build a little bit more and steer the storm a little bit further northward. But that still has yet to be seen. There's also, of course, a possibility that maybe this ridge ends up being a little bit too weak to the point where there isn't much instability for this storm system to work with, and it just, rather than develops into a significant snowstorm, just fizzles out as the jet stream is a little bit too straightened out over the United States for enough instability to happen for this to develop into a significant snowstorm. That's still a possibility as well. At this point, I think some sort of major winter storm is slightly more likely thanks to the agreement we're seeing from both of the computer models, but we can't rule out that possibility either. So let me show you guys European models 500 millibar height anomaly as well, show you guys get a better picture of the similarity. So like we see, the European model also is expecting the trough to move further southward, and it expects the ridging to be just weak enough for this storm system to dip further southward and the cold air to dip further southward for a significant snowstorm to occur for the Midwest and Northeast. So of course the key thing will be how strong this ridge will be, and I wouldn't say we'll get a good idea until by the time we approach maybe this weekend, once we see this Alberta Clipper move in, because that by the time we see this Alberta Clipper move in by this weekend into early next week, that'll give a good indication of how strong it is, how strong the ridging will be. And if this low pressure system ends up being a little bit stronger, then we're more likely to see a dip further southward to allow a major snowstorm to occur for the Midwest and Northeast. But at the same time, this Clipper system can't be too strong, because if it's too strong to the point where it completely shears away the ridging, that would enhance the instability. Then the air might be too stable by the time we approach next week for this storm system to intensify. So there's still a lot of factors we need to take into consideration before we get a little bit more certainty, but I'll certainly keep you guys updated, and we're definitely going to need to see the computer models over the next several days if they continue towards this idea of a major winter storm for the Northeast and the Midwest. I think it's more likely to happen. It just is a matter of where, and of course that depends on the ridging that's right over the Southeast. So I'll certainly keep you guys updated over the next several days. Now, let's say if the current computer models were 100% right with their forecast when it comes to this winter storm. So based on what the European model is forecasting with this winter storm, this would be quite significant for the Northeast and the Midwest, because we see that for cities like Boston, New York City, and even Philadelphia, you could experience maybe up to a foot of snow if the European model's forecast was 100% correct. That still has yet to be seen, but it's definitely something to at least keep an eye on over the next few days, because it could be rather significant if everything goes right with this storm system. And shifting our focus a little bit further westward, we see that this will also be very impactful for much of the Midwest, where places like Nebraska, Iowa, places like northern Illinois, northern Indiana, as well as much of Ohio, you would experience more likely over 6 inches of snowfall with a storm system like this. So it's definitely something you at least want to keep an eye on over the next few days, see how the computer models adjust their forecasts, because this could be very significant, especially as we approach the busiest holiday weekend in the for the year, which is Thanksgiving weekend. So you definitely want to be aware of this if you're potentially making Thanksgiving travel plans, because this could certainly play a big role in determining your exact travel plans for Thanksgiving. And with the GFS model's forecast, it's forecasting a fairly similar swath of snow over many of the same areas, but there are some differences. For example, the snowfall is slightly further northward in the GFS model scenario, as it expects the ridging to be just slightly stronger to where it'll take a track further northward. So places that were experiencing over a foot of snow in places like Philadelphia would experience little to no snow in the GFS model scenario, and New York City would certainly see less snowfall in a scenario like this. And another thing too is that it more so moves in a straight due east direction rather than a slight northeast direction like the European model was forecasting, which would bring more snowfall to the interior portions of Northeast, more specifically right over Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. In this scenario, the GFS model is expecting more of a due east direction, so the snowfall mainly impacts the areas further southward in New England, but Boston still experiences a significant snowstorm out of this. While for the Midwest, it's a fairly similar forecast as well, a little bit further southward compared to the European model as well, but not by much. It's still, you guys are still experiencing the general forecast of around 6 to 10 inches of snowfall for northern Indiana, Ohio, and even portions of Illinois. So you still want to definitely keep an eye on that over the next few days. And here's a quick look at the Arctic oscillation forecast over the next few months, and I more strictly want to focus on the next 2 weeks because, as you can see, we're going to be in the negative Arctic oscillation phase, which is definitely a big difference compared to what we've been seeing over the past month, where it's been in a positive phase. So a negative phase would promote much colder and snowier than average conditions typically for much of the eastern United States. So I believe that this could also contribute to the likelihood being higher of a snowstorm developing if we're going to be in negative Arctic oscillation, where the jet stream dip should be a little bit more pronounced. And I believe that that will certainly make it a little bit more likely we're going to see a snowstorm by Thanksgiving weekend. But still, stay tuned for further updates, as I'll give you guys more in detail forecasts of where exactly the heaviest snow will fall with this snowstorm by the time we approach next week. So in all these areas shaded in the pink, these are the areas where you need to pay at least a decently close amount of attention over the next week, because these are the areas currently most likely from the computer models to receive major snowfall. It's still highly uncertain. I want to keep emphasizing that in this video. We're still 7 days out from the Thanksgiving time frame, so there's still a lot that could change, but definitely at least stay tuned for further updates, as a pattern is certainly looking a little bit more likely that some sort of major winter storm will occur. We're just going to need to see where exactly it occurs, and we'll get a better idea of it, I'll say, by this weekend into early next week. But that's it for now, guys, and I thank you guys for watching.